Welcome to Amicast, podcast about Amiga computers. I'm your host, Krzysztof Radzikowski, but call me Krzysztof or Radzik. Welcome to the number 11. So this is the Amicast. The number is 11. And today's special guest is Mike from Cloanto. So welcome. How are you?
Thank you, Christoph. Good to be on Amicast. You made me install the podcast software on my phone to listen to your podcast in the car. So it's exciting to be here.
Oh, thank you very much. So, but now you have the options to listen even more Amiga podcasts because last year we get the Amigos podcast. I don't know if you tried, and now is Retro Hour podcast, something connected with the Amiga and the Boeing Sword because you speak German as well. Yeah, so for you it's possible to.
It's good to have all these alternatives, and actually, yes, this year I see I'm involved in a couple of these already. Yes, it's a pleasure.
So very nice. So very good. This is the good for our community. So I think we can start like usual. So your or we started like this. Besides of the Amiga, in your private work or some in your work, what you are doing, if you can say.
Well, like many Amiga users, I think we are very much defined also by this evolution in the past decades, I dare to say. I mean, I grew up with Commodore on Amiga before even being a teenager. With 8-bit Commodore 8032 and VIC-20, and then when the Amiga came out, that was the perfect machine, best hardware, best software, elegantly together. So that's when I started programming also in C and switching from the 6502 basic and machine language on the PET. So for decades, this defined me day and night and weekends. And of course, the creative aspects of it, they meet the definition of many hobbies also, but you can't say that you are very much of an extrovert probably if you prefer to stay with computers, no? So I'm still like that today. I add to the passion of creating in writing and in products. So I'm more of I feel like a product designer and architect a little bit. I like creating usable products. I work as providing feedback to polish products from others, for example. And in this Amiga niche, there's also this retro, this keeping alive the flame, in a way, the torch of what defined us in the past. So that's an important hobby for me. On the business side, we do more boring things. But these allow us to finance Amiga Forever because, sure, thanks to the users, it is possible as a project, and it has been possible for almost 20 years now. So it's community sponsored in this way. It's not just the commercial evil side, but it's also the thank you side. But still, the project is barely, sometimes it's in red, sometimes it's barely black, even breaks even, and we immediately put all the money back. But still, all the time we take and other resources we get from our business-to-business work, which is with currency solutions, and some of the aspects, though, from that world, quality, procedures, security, and these things, strangely, you also find in Amiga Forever, and we can talk about it later. So you see all the code signing on the sandbox, and you have Amiga Forever and other sites, all HTTPS, and we don't exchange data insecurely, and all these things. So when we certify with Microsoft, so all these things seem to be, they're probably boring listening, but there's a dimension of quality which transpires from the business side into the consumer one, and we're covering both. I do have some hobbies Like I'm an instructor with St. John Ambulance, so that's totally unrelated. You have to be in touch with people, and just like this podcast, talking to you and the Amiga events, it's good to be in touch with explaining and questioning situations. I think they help you understand and move forward. For me, it's a lot of learning always. So yeah. Yeah, that's about it. I find myself really working bad hours. I'm not a good example. So yeah, to keep the Amiga thing alive, it's taking a lot of time that possibly should be spent otherwise. But you cannot have it all. So we are trying hard. But yeah, that's it.
I know the feeling. So okay, so now the question is as well, I think, typical. So your first Amiga, it was your first computer, and this the story of you in the Amiga world.
Well, I was, as I said, I was already programming, whether I was trying to imitate the arcade games or I was doing work for the company where my father was working. I was doing like mailing list software on the Commodore PET, or I wrote a little word processor there. And then the VIC-20, I was dreaming in color, so at one point the VIC-20 had to arrive. I never had a C64, but these things like sprites and so on, I tried with some friends. It was interesting. But when the Byte magazine with Amiga came out with the cover story, I fell in love with it. I started even before it came in Europe. I started ordering the Addison Wesley books. I learned programming in C, all in theory because I couldn't have the machine. And then I was studying computer science when the Amiga came, and they were forcing me to do the code in Pascal. So I was doing the code in C first on the Amiga, and then I would rewrite it in Pascal, which, okay. So in the first years, I wrote a software for the handicapped, word processor, and that's when Cloanto was incorporated. So it started with Amiga. And
okay, so the Cloanto is how old in this situation?
That was 87, so we are 29 years now. And we have two companies in the US and in Italy. And well, we still do software, quality software development, publishing, now software as a service, as it's called now also, but still I see it as a software trying to change and improve all the time. It's a big challenge, it's when I started, you could have there was the internet but not the web. You could have an overview of things through a few technical magazines. There were few events were important, and you went to trade shows to see everything that was new, but not so much any longer. Anyway, I got lost now. This is something you will have to yes. So I was switching from the so we went from the creative aspects of software in this smaller community to additional layers which came later, like marketing and legal. This was not part of the initial years. In the initial years, when the audience was more technical, the market was less mature, a good product was easier to sell. You almost, if you didn't like the idea that you had to also do the commercial side, because some people, and I feel an affinity with that, it seems like begging or like selling your soul a little bit when you like just crafting. When you have then to sell it, it's a different world a little bit. It's like the illusion that a good product sells for itself by itself. No, which instead then you learn that marketing is needed. Of course, a good product is needed as well. You need both. And then came all the lawyers. So marketing was a big change in a more mature market, because brands define products and recognition more. I was hoping that people would learn to recognize quality in software, for example, like you do in cars, in watches, and so on. But no, the opposite happened. The market became less technical, and the standards, in a way, we had the user interface style guides, and Microsoft had them. I mean Amiga, and now everything is even more diverse between apps, between platforms and software and web, and so and everything is full of smoke. So many apps and less technical users, and so things got more difficult. And then after all this extra effort, extra energy needed to present yourself once you have a good product, the legal side also became very, very important. So with its trade,
the patents,
exactly.
And
we started. My first impact was probably when we started to we needed to license the Unisys patent for the GIF file format. No, I actually had done a thesis on the Lebel-Ziff-Welch compression algorithm, so I knew it very well, but I didn't know that there was a patent pending when I had studied it. So in a way, it all helps you learn. So yes, trademarks, copyrights, and patents are now on the table of every software company. You cannot do it without. And so, yeah, the world has become not more difficult. It's now you find solutions online to technical problems. Before, if there was a bug in SISC, in the lattice C compiler, you had to hit the head on the wall yourself until you found why. Now you just Google it and you have the solution. But competition now, I was looking the other day. Do you know how many iOS app developers there are in China? There's 1 million. 1 million. So it's to do something original, or to have the illusion that you're doing something special. It's people are still trying to change the world in a way, but are they? So yeah, it's a fascinating world, and there's many things tomorrow. Now they're selling us on fake promises of artificial intelligence and things, but I'm still looking at the tomorrow thing that will come, really explosive things.
Yes, this is. I have this. I think the same problem, because now I think that everything was already invented or is already invented. So if you have the idea, like I'm engineer, so I have some stupid ideas. So I check it in Google or I check it in Amazon or eBay, and it's already there.
And sometimes the average user, because of the marketing problem I mentioned before, it's already there and it's good, but it's unknown, and that's why you keep also reinventing the wheel. But still, the online world, the modern world, is trying to look for ways for reputation mechanisms, recognition and reward mechanisms. We see them everywhere, whether it's in driving cars, it's online services, renting flats, social networks. The quality, in a way, is algorithmically trying to emerge more and more. But also, like search engine optimizations, there's people who try to cheat and beat the system because they understand the algorithm. So it's a constant game of algorithm and counter algorithm to beat them. It's fascinating.
It's at the end of all, it's somehow it's easier to be present in this world, and it's somehow harder because it's a lot of guys that can make the movie in YouTube or even podcast or something. So it's easier and harder.
I love to be surprised, but also this modern complexity brings us back to the comfortable, predictable Amiga, C64, everything that is retro now is a bit more lifestyle, and I'm in touch daily with our big community of users, and it's so reassuring to intimately know the hardware and the operating system, and to know that it will never change, which makes it great systems. For example, speaking of the C64 or the Amiga, for educational purposes, in my opinion, the immutability of this, you can learn programming the C64, the Amiga, on a tablet at school, bring it back on the PC, and then on eBay buy a real machine, then attend a demo competition, and in 20 years you can still do Amiga demos, for example. I think you will not be able to do Raspberry Pi demos, I think, in 10 or 20 years. These things keep changing. They're good educational tools, but do they have this aura, this fascinating thing that they come from the past? They're not perfect, but even imperfection, the compromise they had to make, the gaps in the silicon and the bugs, everything for me makes these machines also beautiful learning platforms.
Okay, and
that's one field. Others remember these machines for the games, so they play the games of their youth, or maybe they never could afford an Amiga, and now with emulation it's possible, or they play the games of their own youth with their children and grandchildren. We have lots of people sharing these stories, so it's a moment where generations meet. I see children at events who are presented with these strange, let's call them strange, joysticks and pixelated games. At first it seems difficult, but then, because the gameplay essence is there, they enjoy them and they like becoming experts in this. So we mentioned the gaming, and then productivity. Personally, for myself, Amiga Forever was continuity and preservation and productivity thing. I was never a gamer. So my Amiga 3000 was slowly falling apart. It was my main machine until for about 10 years. It was always on. And, one chip broke. I had to replace the SCSI, and the serial would only work with the printer on, or things like that. And in emulation, instantly I had more memory, better graphics, faster and more disks. And I still have my Amiga 3000 exactly there, well preserved. And so we have many users with their own custom Amigas and software they used to have. Maybe they don't use the internet anymore on the Amiga, but everything from the past they can still access. I like this powerful idea of long time continuity of access. Companies like Microsoft, they have their own virtualization solutions like Hyper-V and so on, but year after year they keep cutting. Windows XP isn't supported, Windows 95 isn't supported, MS-DOS isn't supported. So in my opinion, if I was them, that's not the question and it's not the topic, but I would give much more of a priority to preserving everything, because we cannot afford to lose the culture of the past. So we have an obligation. In our case, I feel the obligation on the Common Amiga front, but others, companies which are still there, I think they should do more to preserve their own past, to keep it accessible.
Yeah, to have this story behind the company. Yeah. Something. But now I have the one question somehow connected with this about the retro movement and this trend. So do you think that the retro is a little bit going now to the mainstream, and this is not only about the computers but about for example, the retro cars, the Mini, the Volkswagen Beetle, the even some stuff of everyday use, they are becoming the retro design. Yeah,
I think there's two aspects in this. For the cars, maybe, and also you see this in games and movies, it's
indie games, for example.
Indie games is one thing, but sometimes making a continuation of the old is less risky and less expensive than doing something very new. But this is one aspect, which maybe for the cars, the Volkswagen and Fiat and others started reinventing the old. But I started noticing this retro getting mainstream probably when the first Star Wars prequel came. And you saw these generations wanting to go back to their own youth, and you see people buying pinballs to put at home, and Vespas becoming fashionable again. So yes, in the 90s when we started doing emulation, the technical and legal aspects were interesting, but this being a lifestyle thing like retro is cool. For us, it wasn't retro. For us, it was there were these important challenges of the Amiga hardware market collapsing, no more hardware, aging things, no maintenance, and so on, and the legal aspects of being able to do it properly. But actually, people were accusing us of killing the Amiga, and actually now I hear this again with the PowerPC. But it was not celebrated yet as retro is cool, as the preservation thing, as the ability to do something rather than losing something that we see today.
Mm-hmm.
Today we see it as this. Now, so you can say with the benefit of seeing things from 2016, it became more successful than we ever would have thought in 96 or 97 when we started working on emulation. But still, it's a niche. I mean, we celebrate it because we are surrounded by people who think the same, and we search for it in the forums where we go. But it's like, when I mentioned the 1 million iOS developers in China, it's we are the niche of the niche of the niche. Still, we could make it bigger, because just to mention the educational front as an example, put it in every school, and suddenly you have something big and interesting again. And I believe in the quality, in the merits of these old systems for educational purposes.
I think that for Amiga, it's good time to use this retro movement now to a little bit grow somehow, but we will see. But I would like you to ask you about this, because Cloanto is so old that you said, so you have experience. Can you say the story after the Commodore get down, and what was happening on the market from the business side of developer, for example? Yeah.
You mean the changes between when, like, Commodore bought the company and when it went really down?
The market was collapsing, something like this. So how the developer survived this, or the story behind this?
Yes. Well, I was an early developer, so I was there with all the excitement. Whenever there was like a developers conference or a trade show, there was Irving Gould, like at CeBIT, or there was Jay Miner at the developers conferences, like in Paris. You hear my interview there in the Amiga Forever. I did that. Everybody was there, and you had this feeling of how technology is going to change the world, because really there were one innovation after the other, radically different from the previous generation. But also things were changing. The market was getting more mature. The $1 billion year that Commodore had before it bought Amiga was a peak. They didn't expect it to be a peak, and then there was a combination of factors, from possibly poor product positioning, inventory issues, lack of strong leadership and direction, good competition, getting better. And around 1991, I already sensed problems. I remember, when was the first Gulf War? I think they had to cancel. DEFCON was cancelled, or they said we cannot put all the staff on a single plane because it's too risky. So, but these were just tips of icebergs. It was shaping into the problems we would see in 93. So I sensed, and still in those early 90s, our personal paint software, for example, was bundled with every Amiga sold. So for a small developer to replace Electronic Arts in this bundle was a very exciting thing. Electronic Arts made millions of dollars in the early Amiga years by bundling D-Paint. This was outside of our numbers, because those were the very good numbers. But then they invested in 3DO, which was a competitor to Commodore and Amiga. Commodore didn't like that. Plus, our P-Paint was better at handling AGA and RTG graphics, so they were using us in trade shows, and they were happy to use us to replace D-Paint in the bundle. When D-Paint was created, it wasn't. We didn't aim at that. Strangely, it was the successor of a color version of a fonts editor we had. The personal fonts maker, which became color type, which became D-Paint, which became an Amiga bundled product, which was a great experience. But also imagine when you are in a growth as a software company, very dependent on this, to suddenly everything turns negative. People, where you were selling inventory to Commodore distributors all around the world without thinking too much about can they pay you later. Sure, everything was paid later in a way, but in that year, in '93, what was it, when the liquidation was, the bankruptcy, they started collapsing one after the other. We were suddenly very exposed. Not only had the growth stopped, but suddenly we were all very exposed also with our software sales, where we had shipped product, and it was physical products then. It was like 1,000, 2,000 copies of this or that, and so I could, you could have bought a house maybe that back then with it. But anyway, so we decided the numbers were not looking good. They were good for hardware companies, I think, who could offer expansion boards, accelerator boards, peripherals, and things where Commodore didn't produce anymore because they closed. Now it was an opportunity for hardware developers. But for software developers, you were really relying on these new sales. Like every holiday season, new people were buying Amigas, and then they would get software. So this was important also to keep the software companies growing. And I must say, the people like Petra Tischenko in Germany, or David Pleasance in the UK, and others, they recognized the suffering of the developers, and they did everything they could to support us developers. But still, nothing could beat actual healthy growth of a market that goes on because there's products. So suddenly there's no product, and it's not much you can really do to help. So they asked us to do a few projects like data types and other internet related things. And that everything helped, of course. But still, the confusion came because we didn't know, are they going QNX? Are they going, they said the classic is dead now. So we couldn't do like Personal Paint 8. It was supposed to be like true color layers and vector, and actually more than 24-bit real true color like you have now. But everything was on hold because you didn't know what is the platform going to be. The classic officially was renamed, so by definition it was the end. And instead now we're still celebrating that. So I'm surprised. I mean, I'm surprised by many things. I'm surprised how these things from 30 years ago still define you today. Going back to your very early question, what do you do in life? In a way, I'm really, really, really surprised how the things we do in our teens or whatever, sometimes it's a university thesis that defines you, and you don't think when you do things how important,
which the decision makes your life.
It shapes you. I mean, I've done other things in life, whether it's the emergency volunteer, whether it's interviewing World War II veterans, and always I was surprised by when things start, you don't realize that. But what I would like to say maybe to something young who's doing their university thesis is, okay, now you spent a few months, maybe a year, it's a special topic, but can you imagine that this will remain, your thesis will continue defining you for decades, because there will be less and less time to reposition yourself with that intensity and time, day and night, in another field. It gets more difficult. Sure, you can do it, and I find it refreshing to be surprised and to do something different. That's growth, like this podcast now. But it gets more difficult. So sometimes you are really surprised by these old things defining you for much longer than expected. And yes, I'm still attaching Amiga floppy disk labels today. Would you have thought that? these floppy disks, they were so cool. These, the 3.5 inch, and they were expensive. Like a box was like 50 euros.
This is true.
A box of 10.
Yeah, I remember this. And the hard drive is.
Wow. I mean,
this was
my word processor and the other software in the first years. I wrote with 4 floppy drives. One was the boot, the system. One was the compiler, and one was the project disk. And the other I don't remember now what I used.
I want to ask you about this old days about the piracy, because a lot of guys say that the Amiga was killed by completely piracy in the market. So every software was in 99% stolen, not bought. So from the developer side, how it was?
Well, it's a what-if game. I think for Commodore, calling it piracy, it's already a difficult topic. We have this situation where with technology, the cost of many things, of making things, tends to zero. Now, more and more countries are even talking about, giving a fixed minimum wage to people, even if you do nothing. And this is possible in part because machines have taken over a little bit, not the science fiction machines, but still a little bit with automation and with extraction of resources, which requires less people and other things. We can afford to maybe have shorter work hours and even less. But the trend is ongoing, and it may explode in one area or the other in an unpredictable non-linear way. So the cost to produce software, of course, tends to zero, like music and other digital goods. Recently, we also had good examples where free software is free, like shareware, open source software, browsers, things you don't pay because somebody else is paying for it. Often it's a company. This started in the .com years. Oh yes. Piracy. No, in the 90s, and then I'm going back to your question more properly, but I'm sort of going back in time now. In the 90s, piracy was being contrasted by police forces all around the world. I mean, in the Western world, I saw in Italy at the time, first every computer magazine store was giving, every computer shop, actually, they sold you the computers with pirate software. You could buy pirate cassettes in every magazine store. And then the IRS and other forces stopped that. Shops had to sell legitimate software, and business had to buy original software, which was good for the software industry. I think this is not sure, because then we go also to shareware and to trialware and to, is it really lost revenue if somebody cannot afford to it? Is it good advertising? The truth is always a bit more complex and in between. Anyway, then I think it came with peer-to-peer. It came, with the internet. Many governments started realizing, like the old Romans, I think, who gave bread and circus to keep the people happy. Many countries, and I would put Italy for me is a prime example of this. They didn't do anything about piracy anymore because people were happy getting free music, free movies, and the perceived value of the digital, including software, went down. It went down with good examples like open source efforts, Linux, Firefox, and other projects. But also it went down because what you can do is moral at the end. I mean, I saw this in bubbles before, like in Serbia when there was the embargo. Everybody was swapping everything, and it was the only way you could do it. There were no moral problems, and culture in many fronts flourished. Still, it works in a bubble because the actual creative, expensive processes are outside. But this lack of contrast for the modern phenomena but also not lack of contrast. It's a lack of solutions. We are debating now, should there be a flat fee for music and these things? I think the solution will come. Anyway, back to piracy. We always knew as a software developer that there was piracy. I tried to make a point for myself not to engage in this, but we knew from the C64 days, from the 8-bit days, that these cassettes were being spread, that it would always be with us. It's not that you do it and then you're surprised at this piracy. You knew that 1 in 10, if things went well, you would sell.
So it was calculated, something.
It was
like,
known.
I mean,
things were not calculated, like I said, for the bundle or these things that go well. They're not calculated, but also I never had the illusion that I would stop piracy. I learned that you can first you must not punish honest users. So I would never put an anti-piracy protection or something where the pirate version is better than the non-pirate one. That's crazy.
I know.
This is totally stupid. I mean, you can the version that spread would always be the cracked one anyway. So you're only hurting the honest user, and also the truth is in between. You must not make it too easy to get things. So yes, every now and then, a major download site or something like that, when they report it, it's not just your duty because you're a license holder, but also it's good if you rely on this for sales to send an email to the webmaster, or whatever now they call it, the DMCA notification. So you close that. But I wouldn't invest too much in anti-piracy code, activation or these things. Yes, some activation to see that duplicate keys are not used 100 times, Yes, but punishing honest users for that or putting crazy resources in the code, I think somebody determined will always crack you. Even if this year there's a rumor that some groups have stopped cracking some type of code, but I think this.
I heard from China, yeah.
But I heard this before, a few weeks before, and I think whatever, they will also find it. And these anti-piracy measures, they connect to our topic of preservation. They are preventing, in a way, long-term continuity of access to these works. So if they relied on some activation servers, if they rely on some number of the hardware or some, dongles is not our case, but sometimes they can be registered
to the internet card. I know this from my work, for example.
Yeah, if it's a MAC address or disk ID or the configuration changes, and will it be possible for me to run my Windows 7 virtual system 20 years from now? I don't know. So, but my humble role, of course, talking about this is good because it spreads awareness, but my humble role aims to make it possible, at least with all things CBM and Amiga. That's how I define it. Sometimes I must be careful not to widen the interest too much. You are on a dictionary page and then you see another word, another one. You can spend 2 hours on the dictionary instead of looking just the word you were looking up. So we do CBM and Amiga well. This is what we try to do well. And IP is also an important part of that, and we managed to secure some of that, and it helps. So doing other directions where we rely on others, it's a different thing, even if you have cross-platform code.
Okay, so I think we can start to moving in direction.
Please bring me back to the one dictionary word I was looking up because I got lost. You know the feeling, it happens to you too when you look up something, or maybe now you do it on the internet, but you were looking up something on the dictionary or encyclopedia, and all of a sudden you find yourself interested in many other things.
Yeah, you find everything else but not the thing that you are really looking for.
Anyway, I would like to add one thing, if you allow me to. Piracy. I think there is potential for a renaissance of shareware, for example. Shareware meaning that you can have software that you can use for free with no limitation, but in a way, there's freedom to contribute to what you can.
This was the good Amiga days, yeah? The shareware was very popular on IMNet, Fred, Fish Disk, and so on. Yeah?
I was on the board of an association called Association of Shareware Professionals. And in a way, we thought that it was like a mission accomplished. And then the trialware and everything was replacing shareware. But I think there's a potential for a renaissance in that, because it closes the circle between this potential for things to be free, but still the need for support, at least in the consumer side of things.
Maybe the shareware story now is a little bit changed in mobile device, because now you can buy the application in the little version, and then you have this micro payments. Sure. Then maybe this is the solution. Or this is the evolution of shareware.
If you are a student or if you're unemployed, for example, if somebody writes us, they say, look, I'll buy it, I don't have the money right now. Do we ever say no to... No. If you lose something because you had a flood or a fire, whatever, you get a free replacement, of course. I think that's how everything digital should be. But why say no if you cannot? Sure, there's people who can cheat, but if a 9-year-old tells me he doesn't have the money, how silly would it... What do I gain from not giving a free version to that person? So even the app, why not give him the $4.99 garage software to play music properly? Maybe he becomes the garage band or whatever. It's not free, you know. So there's many apps where, in a way, the challenge is to optimally maximize what is possible and make more people happy. So some people would be happy to support you with $100, not with $1, and they don't know how to do it. And they would do it, and it would help you. It's not that you're going to then waste it and gambling. No, you would just put it back on work.
People are crowdfunding the games that nobody wants to release because make no sense in the opinion of big developers. But at the end of all, a lot of games is founded like that. I don't know. Maybe Kickstarter is the solution for Amiga problems as well.
It's a good idea, but Kickstarter has a lot of broken promises and money gone nowhere. I paid for some projects. I'll never get what I paid for probably. So it needs a way to guarantee and secure things, some sort of insurance.
Okay, let's come back to the Cloanto and the start of the emulation, because we know now that this was not so easy after Commodore period, and then at the end of 90s the emulation of Amiga starts to be maybe not popular, but start to be present. And Amiga Forever packet, I think it's quite popular, and it's as well quite old, or is experienced.
Yeah, it changed radically also between some major versions. So, are you finished with the question?
Yeah. So, story about the Amiga Forever, how it started. And
in those difficult years, we were really looking for a direction. On one hand, we were big PowerPC fans. I remember these magazines like PowerPC News, Microsoft, Unix, Sun with Solaris, Next with OpenStep, and Apple. Everybody was talking PowerPC. It was going to be this huge common hardware reference platform, and everything would work on it. Even I myself, I was in Cupertino with some new fancy OS that was supposed to work on this elegant RISC architecture. But then Intel showed us that with complexity or brute force or new approaches, you could compete with that, and things changed. So in those years, we were looking for alternatives to Amiga software development, which was clearly in decline. So The figures were tragic. We put personal paint on Aminet because, in the spirit I mentioned, if you cannot sell it, at least give it free. We would not invest in Apple back then in 97, 96. The situation was very difficult for them as well. So we wanted something that was the opposite of Amiga, something where you could be sure that it was not going to fail like Amiga did. So we were really badly hurt and bleeding, and so looking for solidity. Windows in that time, Windows NT4 came out. It was a nice operating system for me. Also from an engineering point of view, it felt solid. It looked like Windows could be a platform, and CPUs were powerful enough to, as Bernd Schmidt showed, have also emulation. I remember I was thinking about Amiga emulation back in the OS2 days. It's multitasking. Why don't we multitask one processor with one task, and so another thread something else? But to keep it in sync was impossible back then with that approach. Anyway, Bernd Schmidt showed that it was possible with the technology then available. We got in touch also with other people. Brian King, who inherited from Matthias Ortmann the Windows port, spent 6 months with us. We spoke about the licensing things. Would it be okay? We spoke with Gateway, met several times with Amiga International and Gateway, who at the time took over. And so back in the days, emulation of other platforms was seen as something related to piracy. Possibly it was, of course, if there is no legal offering, you have to download the ROMs or whatever. And still Nintendo, Sony and others didn't see emulation of their systems as something that would be possible. So you had police raids and court dates and these things. We wanted to avoid that on the Amiga, and we managed to do that. So we had to license the trademarks, patents and copyrights back then. So we had the official powered by Amiga logo. So we had the first official by Amiga notebook and so on. The fastest Amiga possible back then on an Alpha CPU. It was interesting to see that first year of emulation, but also it evoked some mixed feelings. For some it was a good alternative if everything failed. This aging hardware problem where you have a backup plan with emulation, and for some it was contributing to the death of the Amiga. But my saying always was, look, emulation is between 10 and 50 times slower. If this is killing the real thing, it means the real thing isn't so good anymore. Or if it's too expensive, I don't know. At the time, however, it just wasn't available. So Amiga Forever in the first version was a very thin layer of player user interface code, and this too evolved in parallel with WinUAE and other components that were there. Over time, we also licensed CyberGraphics and other components, which also went back into the open source project. It became open source. I mean, UAE itself, when we started, wasn't GPL. We helped with our contacts because we had to ask permission to distribute that. In Amiga Forever, with those same contacts, we also asked if it was okay then to make a GPL 2, or it was 2 at the time. Over time, however, the player you see in Amiga Forever, on Windows at least, evolved into something which was completely rewritten around 2007, when we introduced the retro platform architecture, where the UAE and Fellow, they still act as an emulation engine, but all the user interface, things like moving windows, save state, pause, the authoring of titles, they are taken care of by the player, which is the same interface you will see regardless of the emulation engine or even the platform. We are multi-platform. We can do like C64 on Amiga. in Amiga Forever and C64 Forever, you can right-click a title, select Edit, and this title editor is the same. It has some platform-specific options, of course, in the configuration section, but the experience is shared. If you are a power user, you want to make your titles long-term accessible and described and configured with ancillary data like screenshots, manuals, or whatever, you can do that. We have this file format called API9, which is like a zip package with an XML manifest and all the disk images and the other data I mentioned inside. It's one file to download, one file to move or edit, and you can play that with different plugins, WinOE, WinFellow, whatever is compatible with it. And the code necessary to author and play this back, before WinOE started pulling in like from QEMU and DOSBox, now it's emulating so many different CPUs because the Amiga itself has the sidecar and the PowerPC expansion and so on. But when it was 60K only, I think we matched our code and the open source components and the glue components in the middle. They were pretty balanced. So it's not just that we are selling without adding value on the code, not even mentioning the legal, but on the technological, the code value. Everything is deeply integrated. There's a constant conversation with the open source developer, but also a lot of time spent in-house on other aspects, which are also code. And so now we are looking at mobile and Mac.
I hope so about the Mac, because I use the Mac and I must use the virtual machine or Winnie to make the Amiga Forever or WinUI working. So I'm not happy. I'm looking forward for the Mac edition.
So it's lack of resources. The decision from 97 to start on Windows, in a way, it's still the largest share. So it was good, but I think the Amiga users also, with a passion for diversity, they also embrace the Mac in higher than average share. And mobile takes away time from people who are not busy on the desktop, but maybe they could experience something on a tablet or on a phone.
This was to that I have one more question, because I think it is quite easy, maybe in legal way, on the Android, but on the iOS I think it's not so easy to make emulation. But it will be great to have the Amiga in iPad.
There was a change in the last few months, but nobody really noticed it. Apple released their development environment also without requiring the $99 a year subscription, which was the blocking point to make the App Store compatible with the GPL requirements. So because Android and Microsoft had free tools that allow you to access and modify the code, they would qualify to host GPL code. But as the case of the VLC media player showed on the Apple Store, that was determined to be the incompatibility. But now this $99 a year requirement is not there anymore. Apple still has another obstacle, which is it doesn't like emulation and adding content too much. So in iTunes you can add your own PDFs, your own text files, to an app. You can even play your own music. But if you can access your own games, then right now they still see it as a problem. But there's some apps they give you access to a folder on Dropbox. And who am I if to say that you cannot in this Dropbox share have PDF files or MP3 files or RP9 files, which are the files which, as we mentioned, is our way to exchange content in a cross-platform way. So you can configure the titles on the PC and play them back with one click on a very simple user interface on a phone or tablet. I think this is possible. But I would like to mention this thing that changed in the last few months, that now I haven't seen an in-depth legal analysis about this, and it surprised me that nobody in the mainstream media has noticed that now this big incompatibility, which was raised as an issue with the VLC media player issue, with the case some time ago, it dropped. It silently dropped from on the Apple platform at least. So in that respect, it's like Android and Microsoft.
This is good. This is at the end of all, Apple must start to fight with Android. I think Microsoft is nobody cares on mobile about Microsoft, but Android is growing very fast. So Apple must respond to this to be first.
Probably, like Microsoft did with the Express Edition compilers, Visual Studio Express, and these things. You want more developers to be exposed without having to pay, and it was not. The GPL incompatibility, in my opinion, was not the priority. The priority probably was to give more people access to the potential to develop. So, yeah.
Okay, so but coming back to the Mac version, so can you say something when it can happen? For example, to bring the native version of yeah.
We are so busy. We are so busy on so many fronts. We are collecting. We have been actually for a couple of years now. If you're interested in the Mac version, please sign up at amigaforever.com/Mac.
Yeah, I know this.
And this helps us get a feeling of how many people are interested. And maybe we do a Kickstarter. But if we start doing a Kickstarter, it means it's already really started, but because professional developers are involved, we need also some sort of commitment to estimate whether this is really possible with those numbers or not. So yeah, Kickstarter would be an option, for example, and that's why signing up is a good way. I hope that this year will be the year of the Mac. But I mean, we are talking now on Skype on my 2011 MacBook Air. So I'm a Mac user too. I have Windows on it, but I also have macOS. So I feel the pain.
Yeah, exactly. So, but okay, let's hope that it will it will happen, and I hope the idea of integration of Dropbox with Amiga Forever, it can be not so bad idea. It could be good idea because you can share your states through the.
You already saw a bit of that. There's a new, you have a Mac only, and I don't know if you saw the Windows version of Amiga Forever, but in the media tab, when you edit a title, there's now a checkbox where you can include a special drive. It's called shared folder drive. So you can have, right now you can have like AmigaOS 4 share data with Workbench 3X or even 1.3. So we even show you, this was a little detail that Tony added for this, is synthetic.info files, so that you can, since you don't have a show all in 1.3, you wouldn't see the content. So it's a nice way to share data between different Amiga systems, but also the next step is that this shared folder can be, if you want, magically shared between multiple computers. It's your decision. It will be
where I put the folder. Okay.
So but it's already there. The long-term goal of this shared folder is that you will be able to sync it between mobile, PC, and so on. Of course, you could already now just mount a directory which is inside Dropbox. You can already do this, but it's not a one-click thing.
Okay, so first, for sure, I will move to the emulation of OS 4.1. But before, I would like to ask you about because the Amiga Forever comes with the AmiKit version and for example, Workbench 1.3 and there is the Workbench 3.x. and this is the hybrid workbench on or some. It looked like 3.9, but this is not exactly 3.9. I think. Can we get the future update of this, or yeah, it can be more to the new users, easy to use, or something in this direction?
There's a lot of knots to untie on this front. It's a question with many aspects. So there's a lot of pain also in many people and companies who developed things and then, they didn't have the right contracts in place, or the numbers were not enough, or they just don't want to open this can of worms anymore. And I also see it as our goal to try and solve these issues one by one. There was a dispute between Hagen Partner and Amiga Inc. so that we cannot really use AmigaOS 3.9. It's not clear who has the rights. So my personal goal is that we see the classic AmigaOS open source, but there's some legal homework to be done, which we have been doing for years, one little step at a time. So I think we are getting there. And this, if these people want to, the developers where the rights have reverted and so on, are willing, there's not much money. The money there is can also be shared. So we did contribute to different projects, and other companies are still spreading the small amounts that are there, whether it's payment in money, in software, and hardware, whatever. We need to clear some rights after 93. We are very strong on the rights up to 1993. After that, so 93, you will remember, is when the CD32 was released. So we're talking about 3.1. That's okay, but some small fixes to 3.1 came later, and especially the huge work done by the Hagen Partner developers, Heinz Frobel, Olaf Bartel, and others, that came also later. And we still have developers who, even in Noise, I spoke with two developers. We spoke about possible enhancements. Noise is the Amiga 30 anniversary event in Germany. Since I just mentioned the city name, yeah. The same in the US. I was in touch with some developers and in Amsterdam. So there's a lot of energy there. If just technology and a little bit of finances would help us organize it properly, and people, of course. But we need the right platforms to help glue together things in a very efficient way. And the two stumbling blocks are finance and legal. So whether it's with the help of a generous donor, some large company, or whether we keep doing it ourselves with the sales of Amiga Forever and C64 Forever, and whether we can, one after the other, also clear some things after 93, well, this is what we're doing now. So you went into some very actual topics. I prefer to announce things after they're ready rather than do a Kickstarter, but if I have to, we're here also to talk about the future, of course. So there is interest in 3.1. 3.1 has more apps, it has more developers. Maybe PowerPC, after all, at last, it is realized that, I don't want to dare to call it a failure, but is it a dead end? When you have a modern system, but then it's a modern system where you cannot even browse the web properly. You have to keep up with a lot of technologies, which we were spared in our classic. As long as you don't have the internet, and as long as you are emulating existing legacy hardware, you don't have to keep up with different chipset, motherboards, whatever, USB-C, Wi-Fi N, and high DP, whatever. It's all taken care of by the host. But the internet is the one exception where the guest operating system, whatever, HTTP2, IPv6, different TLS versions now for HTTPS. HTTP itself seems to be deprecated soon. It will be all HTTPS. And I tried some websites, HTTPS. My Amiga browser doesn't support the underlying TLS mechanisms. We don't have reputable source where you can trust the maintenance of the root certificates. It's too. It's really complex. This is exactly the can of worms that we managed to avoid. These boot environments. Why was Cake Slide, for example, so our Amiga boot environment for PCs, where you put the CD in a PC and it starts into an Amiga. Why is that so difficult and hard to maintain? Because there's so many hardware changes over time. So when you stay in the classic niche with emulation, you're spared all of that. But as soon as you go at the hardware level, chipset level, you have it all at once. And the same is when the guest goes on the internet. The internet is a problem. We don't have a secure operating system. I mean, of course, we don't hear many Amiga viruses. Like we hear less about Mac viruses relative to Windows. But I don't think that it's because they are more secure. I think it's just because
not popular.
Exactly, they're less interesting, appealing target.
Wow. So now, because I think I want to ask you about different thing, but now you started with this PowerPC. I'm at the end of all. I'm not so not so big fan of PowerPC. I see I'm not the developer, but I talk with the developers. I was in contact with the WebKit developers, and they say they don't care anymore about PowerPC. This is the dead processor, so nobody use it. And let me finish. So so this brings the problem for NG systems. But the question is, because now I started to thinking about this, and this is not elegant solution maybe, but maybe better is to take the Linux kernel, or BSD, and build it on the new operating system.
Well, you can do it in different layers, like the what was Bernie's before our Cake Slide? What was the bootable?
This was Amitlon, yeah?
Amitlon, right. So Cake Slide, in a way, based on Debian, had a similar approach. And yes, the lowest layer can be, has to be, if you want to be, to save yourself some work. It can be Linux based. It can be Microsoft too has a boot environment. Right now, Amir Ansari is working a lot. Our friend Amir and supporter, and who inherited the Cake Slide maintenance. So Cake Slide is our Linux-based boot environment. We are working on a new version, like 64-bit, and all the shortcomings of the previous versions, they're supposed to be solved. So very soon, we will bring an update to Cake Slide, so you can boot a modern PC with whatever Skylake, CPU, and all recent chipsets, and be sure that the Amiga can run on it. And this is by definition, since now Frode in Norway also has worked with Tony on PowerPC emulation, this will also be PowerPC. So we also have a solution on this front, like we've had for 10 years now, I think. But it will be more modern, so 64-bit and PowerPC inclusive. My problem is not the problem I see is more. I don't know if these developers are representative and where they were 10 years ago, because for me, already in the late 90s, the PowerPC was pretty dead. So if you chose to stay with these expensive boards that cost more than $1,000 or even $2,000 or $3,000 for 15 years, there must be reasons other than, believing in the PowerPC being the future.
I heard this is the problem of license, that the Amiga Incorporated gave the license to Hyperion, but only for PowerPC. The AmigaOS 4 can be only for PowerPC processor, or I'm wrong? Maybe you know more about this.
Well, you can the Hyperion Amiga settlement agreement from 2009 is public. I think there are some limitations in the trademark front, which seems to define and position the contract a bit more than the copyright side of things. I now, to be honest, I think it defines things there in the trademark section, limiting it to AmigaOS 4 and afterwards, but whether it's related to PowerPC or not, I am not so sure.
Because it makes only sense. There must be something behind that we are still using PowerPC, but as I talk in noise, for example, the jump for AmigaOS or maybe for MorphOS as well from the PowerPC to Intel, it's not so easy because the hardware is a lot of different chips, so it's no go. Yeah, at the end of all, makes sense.
We chose the PowerPC also for an issue of endianness. You can have a byte ordering which was the same as the 68K, so that was an advantage with which switching to Intel you lose if you go native. But do we really want to write a new operating system when there's so much competition? I mean, there's so many embedded, real-time, secure, hardened, ultra small, ultra complex operating systems for everything. The Internet of Things seems to have an operating system. I mean, I don't want to be like at the beginning of this call, we said everything has been invented. This they already said 200 years ago and 1,000 years ago. I mean, there's always, but it's a huge effort to write a new or to port a new operating system, and it requires, unfortunately, also this surrounding environment. I don't want to call it marketing related, but to create a community. And some people you have seen at the Amiga 30 events, there is this effort, not the Friend OS effort. I'm very curious to see how that evolves. But it's difficult to create something new when apparently there's no need for it. I mean, yeah, QNX, which was even a possible partner for Amiga 20 years ago, is a great system for many embedded scenarios. Linux and its variations is great. Microsoft too has embedded PE versions of their hardware. Apple has managed to diversify its offering so that it fits phones, TVs, tablets, everything on the back, in the car, in the plane, on the watch. So yeah, AmigaOS promised when there was this in the early 2000s, it seemed that AmigaOS will sell more copies than macOS and iOS and whatever. This failed to materialize, and to be honest, I don't think we need to go back to planet Earth and admit that this is retro enthusiasm. This is something that maybe has potential on the personal side, to create, to express, to show that we don't do it for money. It's just for fun, to learn something new, to stay in touch as a community, to talk to people, but not as a big product thing. I mean, people keep surprising you. There are one-man projects, new operating systems come up every now and then. Look, even Russia has a project where they are funding Windows alternatives. Different countries that we may have not even heard of may have similar efforts, in Latin America and Asia. They may have an interest in schools. There's all avenues that could be of interest, and just one of them could be 100 times the size that we think we have now.
Okay, so maybe I will ask you about different but connected thing. Go back again to this Odyssey, because as I know, this is the problem, that this is this big endian issue in WebKit. Nobody can fix it, and in our community I see nobody wants really fix it. Maybe besides of Deadwood or Case, they are a little bit working of this, but how we can manage this to have the at least model browser in NG Amiga? Not more, only this.
I don't know. In a way, I think it's good that the web relies less and less on plugins like Flash. No, so one thing less to maintain. On the other hand, HTML5 or whatever you want to call it, and all the video codecs and other components that are part of a browser, even without plugins, they expose the complexity which we have mentioned at different layers, from the transport to the rendering. It's a lot of work. And if the porting is not possible 1.1 because of Indian issues, well, yes, I think it could well be that the browser, or it could be an Office project, an open Office like project, could be important factors to consider the switch to the other Indianness. But then don't forget that the underlying operating system is heavily lacking on many aspects which the other modern systems have. So I'm not sure how much it makes sense to invest to add the future on top of something which is weak in the foundation, because it's done by so few people and with so limited resources. So I'm satisfied to use a PC for internet and to have a window of full screen Amiga experience in it. For me, that's fine. I don't, in the early Amiga Forever years, I used a web or whatever to test even websites in an Amiga browser. I gave up, I'll be honest. I don't even know if the HTTPS version of Amiga Forever right now, or we have some sites. Amiga Forever has its own IP address, but we have some minor sites which are HTTPS and they require server name indication. To be honest, not even Windows XP supports that. I don't know if the Amiga supports that. So we are venturing into irrelevance, I think, on too many niche, the sub-niche of the sub-niche of the sub-niche, and on the internet I have to give up. I mean, yeah. I would like, if we did 68K, I think a modern TCP IP stack would be a requirement. You have to have TCP IPv6, you have to have HTTP2, and somebody must maintain a root certificate authority, so revocation and these things. And then you have the foundation, like Microsoft has a subsystem for security for these things, and but somebody has to maintain it, because security requires maintenance by definition. Things change, hash protocols, algorithm, signature, and certificates, they all expire after a few years. You have to refresh, use something stronger and newer. So static is not possible.
Okay, so I think I will come back again to 3.1, because we already talked that could be open source or something, but the question is if we have the development team to make the new version of 3.2 or something more or less in this direction. For example, this could be connected with, or this is connected with Vampire project. I think you know what is it, and this is quite fast old 68K Amiga. Yeah? It would be nice to have the OS 3.2 on this.
Yeah, about the numbers, we should maybe ask the community a little bit. I thought, personally, to me, because 3.5 and 3.9, although disputed, were used, it seems strange to me to go back in a way to 3.2. So that's why we use this 3 point with a capital X, which even anticipated the Mac OS X, and so X as in 10. That's how we see it. But yeah, it could be 3.2, whatever. Yeah, I think definitely, just like we started working on the enhancements with the kind support of some of the developers, more can be done. So it's the point to make it really open and explosive in a total way is that we need to sort out some post-93 legal aspects, and some additional resources are needed.
This is connected with Amiga Incorporated, or this is connected with HM Partner, or this is completely messed up and nobody knows how?
No, nothing is completely messed up beyond potential to sort it out. I think I like complex situations. We have gone through many already, and everything can be one piece at a time sorted out. But believe me, it has been crazy, the time, the money, and the white hair that it cost us. So this is crazy. To do it for the Amiga, sometimes really you have to ask yourself why you did it and why you still do it. And I'm trying to clean it up, also to make it more easily preserved after something may happen to us. I mean, I'm not pretending to be here forever, or whoever, Cloanto, so we have contingency plans. If something happens, we should have at least a couple of institutions. I have two in mind. So one we already were in talks to take over if something happens to us. So I don't want to be like some of the companies which just disappeared and left another mess. I want to leave the proper clearance obtained and preserved for succession. So, but we need help. It's sometimes it seems that what you do, you have the power to do power. I use quote unquote, but it's not really power. It's a burden. When you inherit the copyrights, suddenly you have this issue of you risk being the one who's evil. No, before you were the one who had to ask, and then you are the one who doesn't make things possible for one reason or another, because of obligations, or because of lack of resources, or because it's in conflict with something else. So we slowly move forward. We appreciate all the help we can get. I totally agree with you, even beyond the vampire. I mean, I'm in touch with the developers, but for the future, I would love to see a future 3.1 with or without internet.
With internet.
So, yeah, I mean, we're talking about classic. That's the point. Yes. So continuation, reverting to classic. This is one of the possible futures. The other is change of endianness, like Intel, ARM, and the other is PowerPC. It could be forever in a way too. I mean, the unexpected is always possible.
Yeah. So,
but what is Amiga for you? Amiga is something different for different people. For some, it's a way to play the games with the children and grandchildren. For some, it's the ability to retain their old MIDI productivity or whatever software people had, and like I have my 3000 in the emulation. That's what the Amiga is for me. I'm less for gaming. But for many, it's just gaming. And within the world of gaming, everyone has their own favorites. So there's more than 10,000 Commodore Amiga titles, unique titles, and there's a long tail of preferences. And then there's, in a way, good and bad, the hope that something modern can be achieved. Or then maybe your avenue is more of a compromise. It's a middle way, like the anti-piracy. Don't try too hard, just bring it up to date, fix the bugs. And this is personally also my favorite, fix the bugs, make the essential things possible, whether it's 64-bit or more, a decent file system support.
But maybe this is connected. The potential, the new 3.2 or something OS, it will be more connected in OS 3.9, or it will be more 3.1 with patches, or could be.
It depends what we can resolve. So I think you asked me specific questions. Is it one company or the other? We try to work with whoever is necessary, but some things, they tell you, I have a change right now, please ask me again in 6 months. Or it's really difficult, it was a difficult time for me, I don't want to go back to this, and you have to be a little bit patient. And if you trust me, I mean, I'm committed to exactly the same question of yours. This is more than a question, this is a mission also for me. So and once we sort out, if we can, the things that, So right now I can give you I can tell you what we have achieved, which 5 years was not the case. 5 years ago, we didn't have the freedom up to even 93. Now we have that.
Yeah, exactly. So
one step after the other.
Maybe now I would ask you about this something, because the Cloanto has the rights to OS 3.1, or so, at least you sell it, yeah, and year ago this was the high potential bankruptcy of Hyperion, and everybody was in panic that the Amiga is dead. But so in this situation, can you be a backup? So something like
yes and no. I cannot speak, of course, for Hyperion, but Hyperion has obligations, is intertwined with the rights of several of its developers who also own rights over the code, I guess. So for everything modern they created, let's say the company disappears, probably under copyright legislation, but one would have to see the contracts, what they say. Rights would revert back to the individual authors if they were not already theirs, and you could work with whoever, the Frieden brothers or whoever contributed things. So theoretically speaking, without, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not providing legal advice, I'm not speaking for anyone, but I see a possibility there, building on the rights that we have. So you mentioned the rights to distribute the classic OS. This is how it started. We then confirmed these rights in a coexistence agreement after the Gateway 97 agreement. We also clarified like the classic support thing. No, that's something people asked a lot, but we couldn't do it initially. We were in the difficult position to only say no, but I wanted to say yes, so we clarified that too. This became possible after a clarification with Amiga Inc. that we could also support classic Amiga hardware, for example. But then on the copyright side, although we don't have all the rights to 3.1 in as far as that was completed in 94, we have all the rights up to 93. So we own the copyrights, everything up to 93. It's not just the right to use it, it's the ownership. So if everything after that failed, we could continue building from 93.
Okay.
So that's and it's not, there's not so much code in 94 if you speak about 3.1. Of course, we could also join forces and with Eros, with other projects. That everything is possible. So
yeah, this is maybe now good.
We have no claims over AmigaOS 4, of course, and as the copyright owners for the materials which we own, we have to respect previous agreements, which we do, of course. Every time a copyright changes hands, the past agreements travel with it.
Okay, so maybe now it's a good question about this, because you mentioned it about this cooperation, and like I always saying that the Amiga community is divided. We have the MorphOS, Eros, OS 4, and the Classic. So do you think this is possibility in future to cooperate more or join forces, or this is not possible and this will be goes in this 3 or 4 directions?
Yeah, I think there is a few directions by definition. Let's say if you ask me the same thing about the C64, no, I would tell you that the C64 has a nice, clean, uncontaminated retro identity. The Amiga instead, the Amiga is already split in two. It has the retro identity for the classic, and then the one you call NG, which is the hope that something new is possible and it will be really modern, which is a challenge. It can be a sad challenge, or it can be, let's give it the hope for success. I like to be surprised in that respect as well, and so many developers have done great things, but there's also shown the limits of how complex the world nowadays is to support different technologies and stay up to date on multiple fronts with such a niche community of users who are the ones who support you at the end. So I think I am surprised that our decision to to basically to focus on the classic, on the 68K with emulation. In my opinion, not because we had the wisdom to see today back in the 90s, but in my opinion, and to my positive surprise, I think that remains the way to go. Whether you are for productivity because you have more applications, or because the important applications for you are the classic applications, or for gaming, I think classic is, for me, that is the Amiga. Everything else for me, I bought a Micro A1, I sold it again with the emulation. Now I again started with AmigaOS 4.1 a little bit, and other people are doing just that. But it doesn't give me any added value. To browse the web, we said we have to use a modern browser anyway. And modern is whatever is the latest version. It's not even the previous Firefox or Chrome version. It's the current version. No? I'm sorry, for NG, it could be an interesting academic exercise. It could be, well, to be very technical, there's so many things in internal parallelism, in memory management, in security. Possibly, you could rewrite everything again. For the third time, with the experience of the classic, with the experience of AmigaOS 4, and with the experience of modern. But yeah,
so theoretically, of course.
Even Microsoft, they just, NTFS was a great file system, but it's not good enough to handle the really big data we are dealing now. We went from 4 floppy disks to what was my first disk, hard disk, 20 or 80 megabyte, whatever Commodore had. I think when I started being able to afford it, it was the 80 megabyte. And then we jumped from gigabyte to terabytes without even noticing. It's like the first terabyte disk and the first gigabyte disk and the terabyte. What happened in between, we don't even remember. And now you have bit rot. I made this experience, when I switched to a new hard disk, or even for old archive disks, you have 2 or 4 gigabyte disks, terabyte disks, with videos and archive material. I do a diff. I mean, after I copy, I check that the one is the same as the other. And it happened to me already a couple of times that one bit was different. So this is bit rot at work, in spite of NTFS or whatever. So that's why Microsoft said we need a new file system which detects and corrects bit rot. So you have the new resilient file system. You have it in servers only now, and you can activate it in the registry also on the desktop version. And resilient REFS is able to detect bit rot, so like a bit that changes at random. It shortens the repair operations in many scenarios. You don't have to do disk checks anymore. And when used in a storage space, which is a mirror or 2 disks, it can automatically correct things, even if they happen because of this bit rot. It has additional checksums and so on. And even in the Linux and Mac OS, these things are not so obvious. So ZFS, I think, has something like that. But this is just one example of many things, not just the internet. But just imagine all the layers introduced by USB 3.1 and USB-C, or apparently simple things from redrawing the user interface when you move an Intuition window from one DPI monitor to the one next to it, and it has a different DPI. We had to work with Microsoft engineers to do this properly, and we are proud of it because in a way we are still hackers and we like to go low level in these things. But it's a complex world, and to have this NG in an associated one-to-one to Amiga, NG Amiga, I don't know. It's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. But it will split. It will be split. The people I work with, mostly they are classic. Even if now we have seen, I would say, thanks to emulation, from my perspective, a resurgence of this NG interest. And this question of yours is a proof of it, is a sign of it.
Now maybe let's talk about the PowerPC emulation in Amiga Forever, how it's happened, and which future plans do you have? And as you say, the interest of this version, it is quite. I think it is quite high. Yeah.
Yes, it is high. It is not the highest ever, but it is interesting. Well, I have no claim. I mean, here the open source contribution and potential for the future is huge. For the future is because we have the potential for just-in-time, which Apple had in its own PowerPC emulation already 10 years ago. So there's huge potential for PowerPC emulation, in my opinion. But what Tony did and Frode did, that is huge. QEMU binding it, so the QEMU team also did. That's where the PowerPC emulation comes from. Personally, I enjoy being in frequent touch with Tony. I'm very humbled for the work he's now steadily doing. And as he does from time to time, he says, I did it. It was easier than expected. So, you have this hope for months or years that something is going to be done like PowerPC emulation in this case, because there was a lot of demand for this. No, it's complex. I'm not interested. It's a monstrosity, because indeed it is. It's this expansion board in a classic Amiga. In a way, it's a Frankenstein, no? So the idea already to start working when you don't know it well, it has a high barrier to entry. But then she said, it was easier than I thought. This board, after all, isn't doing so much. So it was easier than expected, and we are grateful that we have it. Now you will see in March 2016 probably the next step, which is even tighter integration. There's this new Zorro board to exchange in a proper way data without using UAE-based 68K emulation hacks. So communication between guest and host, whether the host is Windows, Linux, or Mac, and the guest, and by that I mean Mac, AmigaOS 4 and 3, goes through this virtual Zorro board, 6502/1, and that's it now incorporates the boot ROM. It's there, it's not somewhere else, and it incorporates functionality for mouse handover, for mounting directories, for using a synthetic retargetable graphics board. So this is a new elegant thing which is emerging, and which we're very excited to see this year. And also in Amiga Forever, again, the support, it's already in beta. We keep to have this mission of making it has to just work. So all the impossible combinations or the missing things you have to take into account in the WinUAE F12 user interface. In Amiga Forever, you shouldn't, because we already asked all the stupid questions to Tony, or we tried it all. So we just move some sliders, and that's the memory you want. You don't have to know that inside it's too.
So this means it will be the pre-configured, and it will come with update, yeah?
Yeah, this is a free update in Amiga Forever 2016, but also it's not just pre-configured and dumped down. It is you can edit it, but the edits you make, every combination is cross-checked for integrity. So you cannot do too many impossible things. There will be like a yellow warning triangle telling you, look, you're pushing some Zorro 3 board outside of the accessible memory range, So this is how or some things will be ghosted because they are impossible. So everything you can do in the Amiga Forever user interface has been carefully tested for integrity. If one thing excludes the other, it is visually excluded. This is not always obvious. If something is implicitly required, it is automatically added. And this also was a ton of work. And again, then the configuration is stored in this RP9 file, which comes with the title, and it should be there in a in an emulation independent way for the next 20 years. So it's an XML file. It doesn't describe things in terms of emulator. It describes things in terms of real hardware. So like using Amiga references or C64 references for C64 Forever and so on.
Okay, so yeah, I'm glad to hear this.
This is the status, and my hope is that now we have more integration with this intermediate board, and who knows what the just in time and what else the future may bring.
Yeah, because maybe the future of NG system is PowerPC emulation. It's cheaper, maybe in future will be faster, but with this I have the question connected because maybe classic is not enough to emulate, and this is connected with the ROM from the Cyberstrom, and this I think for this you must pay or something. Yeah, it's included in Amiga Forever, I know this. Maybe it's better to write the emulation of Open Workstation. This was Pegasus too, yeah?
Well, first, let's not dismiss the classic Amiga. In an irony of sorts, you can use more Zorro 3 memory space in AmigaOS 3X than in AmigaOS 4. In AmigaOS 4, the limit is 1 gigabyte. They took the Zorro documentation to the letter. In AmigaOS 3.1, the limit is 2 gigabytes. If there's a board beyond, it can still be used. In AmigaOS 4, it can't. So, in a strange way, you can have more usable memory. But still, today, what do you do with 2 gigabytes? Yeah, it's borderline for some things. Yeah, you don't need to emulate this Frankenstein thing, obviously. But the goal is also, again, the question is, what is the goal? Is it a modern operating system? We said already that with the PowerPC, because of endianness issues and because of the limitations of the underlying OS, whether it's security or feature-wise, other features, you cannot even run it. It's not easy to port a browser, which in turn, a browser, it's like an operating system in itself. Increasingly, things are more done in the browser. And also, for the past 15 years, we've seen this trend, I think. Do you really want to have an emulation and an emulation and an emulation? Like, how many layers do you need when outside you can have a window next to it and just switch from one to the other? I'm not so sure that, we can emulate a different machine. Once again, I don't think this thought is appealing to Tony, for example, to emulate something that is not an Amiga, but I'm not speaking for him, but I'm just from my personal feeling. But still, we use other plugins. We could emulate with QEMU or whatever directly. There's so many other native PowerPC architectures. We would add our own retro platform layer, like we already did with Vice, WinUI, and WinFellow. So you have the exact same user interface experience you have now. You don't even notice the underlying change. Just you have a more elegant machine. It will not emulate the classic. For that, you will need the same, maybe Amiga Forever, but a different window. So you have a more modern PowerPC machine, which maybe even the Morphos people or whoever does PowerPC, they would prefer a more controlled and system with less unnecessary parts and more complex synchronization or limitations between one and the other. So yes, it could be a different emulation, but do we need it?
Good. So I'm at least I'm a big fan of this emulation. I think this could be
emulation is magic. I mean, for me, the word emulation, it evokes, it's a feeling of refreshing awe and surprise. When I see on a thin notebook this, I have the same feeling of surprise when I see the Amiga boot in the 1.3 with the blue screen. See this on a notebook, and it's back in time, but also the present. So sure, like the floppy sound, they can be annoying, but it's nice to have it also every now and then to bring you back in time.
About emulation, because I think you know this project Alice from Aeon, yeah? This will be the notebook with emulation, but you have the similar solution, this KX project, yeah? But my question is if your project in future will be able to boot in, for example, again, Mac or something like this, because this is only for PCs, yeah?
Well, secure boot, UEFI boot is one of those things that's required. You cannot just disable secure boot in modern days to avoid viruses and so on, but it's different from machine to machine, and it's to have multiple boots. It's a challenging thing. So I know nothing about this Alice project. I understand it's a notebook with something like our own Cake Lite. Amir Ansari is our friend who took over the Cake Lite maintenance. Not an easy task at all, but you have to be a Linux expert, which he is, and have a lot of passion, even if not all the free time we wish to have. But we are expecting a Cake Lite update very soon now. So ideally it would have been already in the initial release of Amiga Forever 2016. It wasn't possible, but it's coming. I know that right now we are not installing properly on many modern motherboards, but a new kernel is being built with the right parts to avoid the shortcomings of the past versions and to support more modern things. So it is the underlying Linux layer, Debian Knoppix based, which we mentioned it earlier here in this talk, and which is the minimum required to not have to deal at the Amiga level with all the PC devices, but then to jump into an Amiga-like environment. And so we have also now because of the new developments, PowerPC emulation will be possible as well. So of course, as I said, in 97 we already had an Amiga notebook with official powered by Amiga notebook logo licensed by Gateway. Now we don't have that powered by Amiga logo anymore, but the Amiga possible notebook has been possible for 20 years. It's not something new. And
but for example, again with this notebook, the question is if you can in future add maybe not Mac, maybe Mac was not so necessary. It's not so, but there are a lot of cheap Chromebooks with Intels. I think it must be Intel. This is possible to make this for the Chromebooks or something like this. You can buy it for €200 and you can enjoy Amiga notebook in this situation.
Well, would you? If I bought a notebook, I would like to buy it with the keyboard layout I wanted from the company I wish, that gives me the local support when I need it. And I want to install with it or to update it with whatever needs to be, including secure boot signature updates or fixes. And I want to be sure that it keeps working 2 years from now like it does now. I don't know if an Amiga developer has the experience to do a modified Windows notebook that meets all these requirements. As an experiment, as a showcase, sure.
Yeah, but I'm talking about Chromebook, and Chromebook is based on Chrome OS, so maybe it's different.
Okay, how much do you want to show or hide? Do you want to boot directly into it?
Yeah, I was just thinking when I buy Amiga Forever, I can make the image of Amiga Forever, put in the stick.
Chromebook, like the Raspberry Pi, is indeed a hot topic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, with more resources, we would address these. We had a collaboration with the Google team who did the Chrome, the emulator in Chrome, the Chrome browser, though.
Okay.
So what would you do with this? I'm curious. Would you like to have a system where you the host? Is there no host OS? Which web browser would you use in this system?
Yeah, this is this was only an idea, and I don't know if this is a good idea.
But it comes up often. So is it like I don't like the idea of a host OS? Like I want only the Amiga to be. it's like this. It's not the real thing, but it's more real if it's nothing else in it. But it's hard to define. I mean, in a way, we don't like Linux or Windows or Mac OS maybe, but we still needed to browse the web, like we said. So without opening security holes and one going through the other, which is another of those aspects where security is a priority. What is your goal?
Maybe the goal could be to have the cheap OS4 machine, yeah?
Yeah, and use it as a dedicated Amiga system. But with emulation, it would still be slower than a. Well, on the other hand, the best you need, it costs money, $1,000, $2,000. So a real PowerPC.
Yeah, the problem is that, as we've spoken, that the cost of the new hardware, maybe the Tabor will be cheaper. I think will be cheaper. But the cost of the X5000, it's, I don't know, because it should be released and it's not released. But it's for sure 2,000 euros minimum.
It's, I think whoever invested in this direction needs to be properly supported and is supported. I couldn't afford to or don't have the interest to go in this direction personally. So I'm happy if we can be a little bit disruptive almost in a way and open up the access to NG Amiga OS with emulation. This is more close to our core mission in this respect. Yeah, I'm fascinated by this. I mean, initially the idea of this standalone Amiga on top of something almost invisible in a cheap modern hardware, like a lot of people are using old PCs, no, for this similar need. They convert old PCs with removing everything possible from the boot sequence, whether it's Linux.
You can buy it on eBay or Amibay. I saw some project like this, yeah.
And you go straight into Amiga. But then, yeah, it's a nice hobby project. I would have one, but I would have one next to my PC probably.
Yeah, for sure. So, without PC, we cannot even record this podcast.
So I have come to accept that emulation in full screen or a window is good enough for me if it runs on the same system where I also have a modern host OS. For me, one machine is enough. Sure, I could have a second machine where it boots straight into this full screen, yes. And for 200 euros maybe, but then I still also think the maintenance and all the things. If it is a Windows PC, this is non-trivial. I mean, as a Windows developer, I know the security and the boot process and the runtime, the interaction with the host and guest. It's as I said, for a one-man showcase to show it to you at an anniversary event or whatever, between friends. But if I have to sell it, am I opening something like the FTC defines it as a mass compromise? Am I opening something that can easily be attacked? I mean, security brings some obligations with it. Asus just lost a case because in their routers they had some flaws. Now they have to do 20 years of security audits. Are we better than that?
Yeah, and there is a hot story from the few days ago that if FBI want Apple to open or decode the iPhone, and they don't want it, and this is the security stuff as well, yeah?
This is equally fascinating to me. To me, the real question of the Apple case is the following. If there is a technology to read the mind, not the handphone. I think our data is an extension of our mind, and in that way it should be considered secure and private to us and to what we decide to do with it. But if there is a technology to read the content of the brain, the mind of a person alive or dead, should the government be able to use it or not? Because if the answer is yes, then they should also read the phone. If the answer is no, they should also not read the phone. I see the devices, our hard disks, our extended memories, using the technology as an extension of myself to create, to express, to take my notes. I see it very much as a as a space where I like to believe it's secure, like an extension of my mind. In this way, I feel empowered, and that's how I think it should be. Like when it's something I discussed with my nephew a few years ago. You're Polish, no? You're from Poland. Pope John Paul II. Pope John Paul II had left a written legacy testament. He said, all my notes should be burned after I die. No, he gave clear orders. These orders were not respected because for the preservation of something of historical importance, it was deemed to be a higher ranking priority. So this is not just, can the government read my phone or my mind? Is it also a question of, can I decide about what happens to my mind extensions after my death, for example? So these are many interesting, fascinating questions that they're increasingly modern the more the technology exposes them to us. But I think, I like the parallel. I thought about this Apple case, and I think the real question can be seen as, go in the future, decide if the government can read my mind, then go back and apply the same logic to, can it read my encrypted phone? And it's not just in this case. We travel customs. You go from the US to Canada, you go to the UK, and sometimes the customs people, they connect a device to your notebook and they want to access your files. Now, if they are encrypted, there have been cases under perceived obligation to provide the keys. So again, I have a main PC which is offline and hasn't been logged off or rebooted for like 4 months now. And my notebook is my lightweight internet connected device, which I'm now using also for Skype. And if I go through customs or whatever, it doesn't have any data which is on the cloud. I can be free to go also in a country which is, let's say, hostile to freedom rights, whether it's, where there's no democracy or whatever. I don't. These definitions would really open a can of worms now. But you have to think about this not just as a criminal, but also as a law-abiding citizen.
Yeah, exactly.
When you travel to another country, you have to respect the rules of customs, which means everything you have, I have to access, and not just for a criminal like in this case. This is also the case right now in Europe. Is encryption legal or not? That's another hot topic. So, but again, go back in the future and answer the question: is the content of your mind yours or not? Or think about Pope John Paul II. Was it okay that he said in his testament that his notes should be burned or destroyed, and these were not respected? I don't have the answer, but I like this discussion.
Yeah, the answer is, I think nobody knows has the answer, because the topic is very hard, and first must be a lot of discussions. Yeah,
we like to be on the forefront of technology and interaction with people, so I think these are healthy topics. And machine intelligence, for as far as it can be even just glimpsed in what is predictable now, will bring much more of a revolution. And then I'm curious to see who will be the first to have it, the good or the bad. Who's bad? We are all a bit good and a bit bad, no? Like
it is depends as well. I think who is good, who is bad.
If I have it, of course, I am good.
Okay, but I think this is we go too deeply.
Yeah, but the seed of evil, like in the yin and yang symbol, no? The seed of evil is also in the good, and the seed of good is also in the bad. So it's.
But maybe let's talk about future. But about the future of Cloanto, what plans do you have? Do you bring a new software more than Amiga Forever, C64 Forever? You can expect something more, or I don't know.
This is a big. If I knew, sometimes you knew what is the right thing to do, you would do only that, and it would be successful. But sometimes we have to try, and indeed, competition is big. we are limited in the way we work, maybe where we are, whatever. And we are not the next Facebook. We are not the next Atlassian or whatever. I see so many interesting companies who keep surprising you in what they did in a few years. So I don't know what will be next. I know that I will have one foot. I would like to always have in preservation of all things Commodore and Amiga, but I need to have another foot somewhere else in order to make this possible. And I wish that this something else gave us the infrastructure to do more also on the preservation front. So I'm always trying to have my eyes open. As I said, we have business software and, that's growing constantly, but not exponentially. It's okay. We can go on with a life like this. It's also a life like this because we always adapt to new situations. So it's never static, but the results are just a small improvement, no big explosion. So when I see a company like Facebook, as I mentioned, Facebook, they were surprised. Like a few years before, the internet itself, the web was a surprise.
The Google was surprised as well.
YouTube was a surprise. People nowadays speak about the DMCA legislation in negative terms, but look at what the DMCA made possible, because it removed the burden, the liability from the content provider. So the content provider now can experiment in many new ways, which before were not possible. It's like having legal emulation, having taken care of that. The same is now for online content. You can put content online under the assumption that it's okay, and only then remove it. Before, the liability was, you could never have done a YouTube without the DMCA, because if there was something inappropriate, it would have been directly tied to the hosting entity. So let's see. Let's keep our eyes open. I hope when we're offline, you will give me some secret idea about the future.
Okay, no problem. I have. We should, I think, finishing our very nice interview here. But I have one question that I don't want to forget. How many guys are working with Amiga Forever and C64 Forever project?
It's a lot. I would say later Amiga projects, since we had these CD versions, were already dozens of people. So who does more, who does less? Mostly working from home, but not everybody. So yeah, dozens. Roles that are brief in time or last for decades, or roles from full work days to more limited. So it's an exciting, challenging cooperation. We try to use tools to help stay in touch, like if we were all in one place and see what the others do and so on, even if we are more distributed.
Okay, so now the maybe easy questions. You use the emulation, of course, for sure. The question is, do you prefer your own workbench, or you prefer, for example, something like AmiKit or classic workbench on this pre-installed systems, or we can connect it as well with the question, advice for newcomers, if newcomers are here, how you can start it with the Amiga and the operating system and so on.
The last question is easily answered, because we offer it all in Amiga Forever. If you like AmiKit, AmigaSys, or the classic experience, the system stub of Amiga Forever comes with every official release, 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, even by hardware to Amiga 2000, 3000, 4000. So you're fully covered in the native original experience. Then we have our own enhanced experience, which we call Workbench 1.3 and Workbench 3X. These two very carefully enhanced experience, meaning that we try to respect the original intention and the last expression of the Commodore Amiga company. So we have some of that, but not in a way that some choices you see in AmiKit, they are really heavy changes. You may like them or not like them. I prefer that the user does this. So if they like AmiKit, fine. If they like just one of the enhancements, they can install them from AmiNet or wherever. So they can add them on top of the original experience. We have plenty of instructions on AmigaForever.com on how to image your own old hard disks, how to exchange data between host and guest, and so on. So anything you can do and modify with your own Amiga, all the different scenarios you can do in Amiga Forever. Not only that, you can more easily change the configuration, do and undo, create copies. It's just right click, create copy, or commit, don't commit, revert. You can do all of that very easily, take snapshots. So there's much more freedom to experiment. I don't feel like I have to answer, my answer. If it was for me, my preferred configuration is one you don't see in Amiga Forever. It's the one I have from my Amiga 3000. I have a tool manager dock on the right. I have an Andromeda Galaxy in the background and other utilities and things which are not in Amiga Forever, because that's what my personal Amiga was, and that still is emulation. I would start from, if it was for productivity, probably Workbench 3X. I would make a copy of that and start adding things. If you feel like you don't like the dock, the tool manager dock we have on the bottom, or you would like to add another one. But 3X is pretty conservative in its enhancements because it doesn't want to distance itself too much from the original experience. So I would say it is a set of essential tools and add-ons, but you remove the work drive. Workbench 3X works fine even without the work partition, and it reverts back to a pretty clean yet updated 3X experience. So I would take either an Amiga 4000 and start from scratch and add what I wish, or consider our enhancements from Workbench 3X or AmiKit. Amiga Sys hasn't been updated in a while. I think he lost a hard disk and was busy at work too. So right now, AmiKit is the example of one possible way to push it really to the limit. But at the same time, you introduce incompatibilities. It's a matter of personal taste. It may be bloatware for some. For me, it's too much personally. So
yeah, it's heavy. It's a nice configured, but it's heavy.
It's almost like a show off of more is better. For me, not always more is better.
Okay, so I think maybe the last question, the future of Amiga in a way, because we already talk about PowerPC. This is maybe not so perfect processor, but now we have the new hardware like Vampire and, for example, other PowerPC Sonnet for classic Amiga. What do you think about this?
It's these days you have smaller and smaller and less expensive devices where we have a long tail also on the hardware side. We have, and this makes it more difficult for us to support everyone. You mentioned the Chromebook, I mentioned the Raspberry Pi. There's a myriad of devices which I would love to see supported more. And I think one of the things we're trying to do is, with some automation, with some standard agreements, to work and meet more also this diversity of hardware. But I'm excited to see. I mean, like recently we had this new AGA core for the FPGA, some FPGA projects, constant enhancements. Or wherever you look, not just PowerPC, ARM-based devices, FPGA-based devices, and PowerPC. So you have these fronts plus the PC and similar systems. Yes. I wish we could do more for all of them, but at the core, we go back to the question of, can we have an Amiga 3.2 or whatever you want to call it? And I think, yeah, that's inside. If you want to put a classic core, yes, that's one way we can do it. Or for the gamers, the games will keep running, I suppose. Now even the Raspberry Pi, the new one, is pretty powerful. The previous generation wasn't really good enough. It was good for productivity. Like in 97, a Pentium was good enough for productivity, but not for games.
Mm-hmm. And this is the last question, because now what do you think? Because I think in our community, maybe more even in classic community, it will be nice to have the new, for example, new quality games, but it should be paid somehow, I think, to make some money for developers. Yeah, do you think there is a small market with the cash in classic Amiga for gaming or something like this, to encourage the guys to do something new stuff? Because the Atari, Commodore 64, they have the new games, good quality. Yeah.
Yeah, and even the C64, you have. I at the Amiga 30th anniversary in Mountain View, I met a developer who has spent years to create a new game to be distributed on cartridge for the C64. And I wish him all the best, and I think he can make it and break even. Also, because there's this clear retro identity, also because maybe the C64 had higher numbers than the Amiga. So the Amiga is at a disadvantage in terms of numbers and in terms of split identity, all these different directions. Modern, not so modern, retro, not retro. App stores, we have plenty, but just like you see that developers tend to prefer like the iOS store because they see more revenue there than on Android and Windows Phone. Okay, if people don't like developing for Windows Phone, why would they develop for the Amiga? And we have a few hundred paying customers. So it's a niche thing. In a way, this is good because it shows that if you have the choice, if you made the choice to stay there, it's a heart and passion thing. Obviously, the same time spent on a game you would have done on another platform, probably it would have had at least a hope of more success. At the same time, you're not really selling this, the retro experience on a magnetic cassette, which still some people do today, or cartridge for the C64. People still do this today with the new releases for 8-bit systems. So it doesn't have this retro aspect. Well, I don't know, to be honest. As a developer, I wouldn't do this, but this is getting personal now. If you're asking me about my feeling, I like to be surprised. So sometimes when people really believe in something, they will, you just see them succeed, even if you thought it's not possible. But I know how small this market is. Yes, I know because I'm in there. So
yeah, true. This is true. I'm asking because the some guys from Poland, they make the game Tanks Fury, yeah, and this is a great commerce in Amiga way success because the game is free to download, or it will be free to download, but they sell quite a lot of boxed version of game. So maybe this is and they find the publisher of this. So
well, we sell boxes too still. Who would have thought that? I thought DVDs and CDs were going to die more than 10 years ago. And
but this is collection way now. Yeah.
Microsoft and others were selling their CD factories, and everything is now indeed online download and activation, scratch card and these things. But still, yeah, boxes, collection. This again, it's a matter of different personality types. No, one is NG and retro and so on. But also, am I a collector or am I on the opposite front? There's more and more people today. They don't like to own anything. Don't give me gifts because then I have to dispose of them and catalog them and whatever. I want an empty house and I have a free mind and all things done and managed. Different people. This is so beautiful, diversity, So if it was for me to give an advice, to be honest, to a young person, I would say yes, developer to make the experience, because the community is great. You can try to go to events, exchange ideas. Today there's so many also gaming and social casual events. I mean, in 2015 I went to 3 or 4 Amiga anniversary events, but I also went to gaming events like DevGam in Minsk and other developer events which are more quote unquote serious, no? And I missed DevCons from the Amiga days, and that's the same energy you can still find at events. So whatever you do, try and relate yourself to real people, see what other developers do, watch your users, how they play the game, listen to the feedback. And but if you really have hope, and software is unfortunately also a bit of a gamble, if you do have hope, well, then aim for whatever console or mobile device that probably fits your intended audience a bit better in terms of numbers. So if you have a big competitor maybe on iOS, it would be an opportunity to have the same app on one of the 2 other platforms, Android or Windows Phone. Maybe Microsoft could even pay you. Who knows? Like BlackBerry paid you for apps years ago, and whatever you find. But Amiga, we are talking about hundreds of people. I mean, look at the page rank. Look at the page rank of sites. By any metric, 4-digit is very, very difficult. So count the active users on sites. Somebody should do this, really, a statistic. Look at the 3 or 4 Amiga sites and see how many people post and are active, log on and post and whatever. So make a nice chart over time, and to help visualize this information. Otherwise, it seems to be, there's a lot of desperation and energy by a few, sure, but how meaningful it is, it's hard to guess from the outside. And as a market, you have to ask the people who have a feeling of the market. I think we do have a good feeling of what's left. We saw how it was. We saw how it changed. We would have abandoned ship in the 90s had it been important for us. So we're still here. I'm preaching the opposite of what I'm doing myself. I shouldn't be doing things Amiga, but I am, so I'm guilty. Yeah, what can I say? If this absurd ending, could it be more fitting than that? Yeah.
Okay, so good. I think from my side is everything. Or I should ask something.
We are still here in spite of everything, and because we are still here, it will continue.
Yeah. I hope somehow.
Thank you, Christoph, for organizing this. You're one of the few who keeps us connected, active, and entertained when we drive or wherever we are. Also, you're like a radio station, no? Which is an important form of culture, and culture is also what this Commodore Amiga thing is very much for me. So you're doing a very important job, I think, to keep us connected and informed, and the dialogue. I mean, I saw you in person in Noise, and it's good to remind us that it's also about the people, no, and the different needs of people and hopes, and not just the machines, the old machines.
Yeah, this was Noise was very nice. I must say and it was nice to meet you live, and now it's as well nice.
So yeah,
it's live without vision. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, and I hope we meet us in the near future somehow and somewhere.
Yeah, the 50th anniversary. How could I miss it?
Exactly. Okay, so have a nice evening, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. It was Amicast, podcast for all Amiga users.